Welcome back to day 14 with our wonderful guest, Linda Reeve. Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you, Penny and
Good.
Kelly? I almost forgot where I was and who you were.
You're in your beautiful office.
So good to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you too, Kelly. Thank you.
Good to see you again, Kelly.
Yeah.
Hope
Yeah.
all is well in Anaheim.
10 minutes.
I know. We were planning right before this. Because it's National Poetry Month, it's the perfect time to have Linda Reeve on, who introduces the world to how to write next to poetry. And we're going to talk today, I hope it's okay with you, about your, I consider, groundbreaking work in helping kids learn how to write from something instead of sitting at their open notebook or on a laptop going, I don't know what to write. Or worse, giving them a topic and they must write this. You always bridged, I want kids to choose their own ideas and thoughts, but how do they access those without teacher modeling and keeping a notebook? It's powerful stuff. You have, as you know, made such a difference in my own thinking. So I thought I'd start with 2 quick book talks you might want to add to your library for notebook writing. Take Off Your Brave is The World Through the Eyes of a Preschool Poet. These are all poems written by a 4-year-old. And you can imagine the reason that I'm purchased it is Maisie and I are going to start writing imitation poems. My dream school, all the kids turn into kittens when they get into the dream school. There will be no bullies and the teachers are all friendly dinosaurs and all they do is chat, chat, chat with anyone they want. I want to work there. The school smells like daffodils and honey and sometimes stinky socks. Some people faint when it smells like stinky socks. The kids are always making cardboard teleporters, but the grown-ups just sew toys. Everyone loves that school. It's such a,
all the kids. All the kids are turned to kittens.
I know. It's just such inventive, fascinating. I love it. And then I wanted to mention, this is a new illustrated version of the beautiful poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. But the poet is a Taiwanese American currently living in Slovenia. She works as a freelance illustrator, but it's like a whole reimagining of whose words these are. I think I know. In our house, and probably because we live here in New England, I must have 5 or 6 versions of Robert Frost, but I absolutely love them. So, Linda.
Yes.
Tell us a favorite poetry book that you've been reading for Poetry Month.
Oh, the one, it's the Kim Stafford that absolutely, the one, oh gosh.
Not The Muses Among Us, is it?
No, it's not The Muses Among Us. It's
okay, I just want to say how lovely your office is. It is.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, didn't mean to get up. It's gonna come from afar. This one.
Oh.
I love this. I mean, particularly because he's got so many that are just his thinking about everything that's been going on during the pandemic. And they're so beautifully, they're just beautifully written. I love his writing. So this is a beautiful book.
I think those are the ones he was publishing on Instagram. He would publish a poem a day for a lot of the COVID.
Yes.
And if somebody is not on Instagram and following the Oregon Poet Laureate, Anis Mojgani, he has started for the month of April. You see a snapshot of this call the Oregon Poetry Hotline for the entire month of April. And when you call, someone reads you a poem. I think it is just ingenious. We all need a little poetry in our lives, but I will put that in the Padlet, a link.
I'm revisiting the Amanda Gorman new set of poems as well. They're really good. So it'd be a really good addition to a classroom library as well.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So Linda, we're going to share my screen and show a little bit about what you've been doing in your notebook. Do you want to preview this, talk a little bit about notebooks first?
Well, I guess I just want to say that I have been keeping a notebook since I saw Don Murray carrying around his day book and thinking that's what I need because I keep losing things that I want to remember. And I just think it's so important for kids and teachers to be keeping some kind of notebook too. I mean, even I was kind of laughing when I met your friend Elaine the other day, because she kept saying, that is not my notebook. I've tried really hard to be messier in mine, but I keep thinking,
What?
I just keep thinking, it goes back to my vacuuming when I was growing up. I would come home from school, and honestly, anything that was out of place, I would put it in the top dining room buffet drawer. So nobody could find anything until they realized I was hiding everything in that top drawer. And then I would vacuum every single day. And I can't figure out. I mean, I think I know why now when I try to figure out why I would do that. But I think that's reflected even in my notebooks, that I have to have them neat, so that I can find things and they feel good to me. So there's not a lot of mess in them. I admit it, I have covered up really awful writing that I hate with a postcard. Or
what did I just show you the other day, right?
I know.
Trying to be Linda Reeve and do a little sketching, and it came out so badly that I covered it up with a photograph of what I was trying to sketch. But we both, Linda, I love that you said you're trying to mess it up, but I am curious about, I think you're doing that for other people. Whereas for me, my notebook doesn't feel like mine until I go off on a tangent and it doesn't look neat and orderly, right? Because until then, I feel like it's all fake writing. This is most recent. Until I get this, where everything is everywhere, it doesn't feel real to me. And so don't you think feeling like it's what your notebook's supposed to be? Does this make sense, Kelly? Like, don't you have to feel that it's yours?
Absolutely. But I just would add that anytime that either one of you feel like your notebook is a little too messy, then we'll just do a session where I'll show my notebook.
Oh, come on. Like, that session would be now, Kelly.
Yeah, right.
No, my notebook is pretty messy. So it's your two notebooks will someday end up in the Smithsonian. Mine will not.
No, yours will, because they're real.
Yours are amazing.
I'd love to see what's happening in Linda's notebook.
Okay, so Linda, I was going to start with the spring one, right? The spring poem. Okay, so y'all know, you ready? This is dress up day at the preschool for crazy hair day.
Oh my goodness.
I gotta say, she looks a little bit like Whoville, don't you think, Lila?
The two of them, they always crack me up.
Okay, so Linda, this is you trying to write a poem, right? Just on the 9th of March?
Yeah, and this was real. I wasn't really trying to be messy, but one of the things that I would say to teachers is to let kids try to find their writing in their notebooks. And I always did this with the kids, so that if it was a first draft, second draft, third draft, it didn't get to the computer until I was actually feeling that it was going somewhere. And I was working on it more seriously. But so this is just drafting in the notebook. And this would be something that I would show the kids too, that I go back, I'm underlining, I'm circling, I'm putting stars next to the lines that seem to jump out at me. And I was surprised by them. So I can go back and play with those a little bit more. And this was a year ago now, I think, when, I just noticed the first crocus and daffodil coming up in the yard. And tried to take some pictures and thought, man, they come up through the snow. So it was more than just the crocus coming up. It was thinking something beautiful can still make its way through things that are cold and scary and frightening to us. And so I went back to this again lately when I was trying to write about Ukraine. And so some of these lines might end up in some of that poem that I'm trying to work on right now. And I don't know it's going to be a poem. It may end up being a piece of prose.
Can I open the Ukrainian one next then?
Yeah, sure.
I thought this was amazing, Kelly. I saw this when I
Wow.
was sitting next to her. Can you talk to us
Wow.
about what's here?
Well, I don't know. I have been so upset by everything it just breaks my heart thinking I'm sitting in this warm home with plenty of food to eat. Nothing has been destroyed. And I see these images on TV and it just drives me crazy because I can't do anything about it. So what came to mind is thinking about um, the entire Ukrainian population and then that little girl who sang the national anthem. So I went online and found how it was written. And I circled that in the middle of this. And then I thought, and what is impacting all of them now? It's these missiles, it's the bombing, and it's just shattering their lives. And so one of the things that I would also say to teachers, high school, middle school, drawing, I don't know why we abandoned drawing in third grade or fourth grade. I mean, the incredible drawing that your kids have done, Penny, all through college even, drawing gets me to the writing. A lot of times, particularly in cases where I just don't have the words for something. So in trying to represent these missile strikes and the destruction of this entire country, I tried to capture it with that shattering of their lives and that they're encircled in it. There are so many that can't escape, but I went back, I looked at some Time magazine articles. I was thinking Kelly's articles of the week, just looking for lines that I could pop out. And I tried to represent the positive, hopeful things happening in the green, that maybe it would bring hope and back to life again. But that's where I'm playing with the images as much as I'm playing with my thinking. And I know these images in all the description that I just gave you are going to end up in, so what did I do and why was I doing it? And what was I trying to show through these images will end up probably being some type of prose or poetry writing. I don't think I ever start out thinking I'm going to write poetry, but sometimes the words just lend themselves to that. So that's pretty much where that came from.
I would add, in looking at that, Linda, that's exhibit A in the answer to the question that Penny and I often get is, why do we have kids still in a digital age work in paper notebooks,
Yeah.
And there's the answer.
Yeah.
There are things you can do in paper you can't do on the computer.
Right.
There's something about that. I mean, I know the two of you agree with this too. There's something about holding that pen or pencil in your hand. It's the feeling of it. I don't know how it actually goes to the brain, but I do know that the entire time I'm working on something like this, I'm adding to the thinking and it's slowing me down so that I'm thinking a little bit more deeply than I normally would be. If I'm trying to write something really fast, it's very different from the slowness that comes from drawing. And I think it takes us somewhere else in our heads that I don't know all the ramifications of that, but I do know that for me, and even in the hard books that I had the kids do, one of the reasons I asked them to illustrate the poems that really jumped out at them was because it slows them down to think about, what do I take from this poem as they're drawing about it. So I don't know. I just think illustrating and drawing, and it doesn't have to be gorgeous drawings. I mean, you taught me, Penny, to use my hand for taking notes. So here are two examples from my notebook of taking notes. Karen Ernst taught me contour drawing. And as you're sitting, looking at somebody speaking, I can really listen harder to them if I'm just trying to sketch them. So there was a Zoom session that Julia Torres and Laura Hall Sanderson and Elizabeth Azevedo did. And I was just sketching them and trying to pull up some things that they said at the same time. But there's something when I can look back on that image of sketching them that makes me remember better what they said. I don't know if that makes sense either, but always when I can connect images and words, it stays in my head better. And the same thing when we were listening to Cornelius up at the Right Now conference the other day. Once I saw you draw that hand, Penny, years ago, I thought, what a great way to take notes. What if every time a teacher went to a conference, you draw your hand and say, if I can get 5 things from this 3-hour, 4-hour session, it will have been a good day. And so I just start using my hand as here's one thing I got from it. Oh, here's another thing I don't want to forget. But metaphorically, all right, I've got a hand on this. I can do this. I can try this. I can remember this. But it is becoming a way for me to really collect, take, and go back to those notes again. So that I can use them in the classroom or use them with teachers. I mean, everything I was doing in my notebook was not just writing for me, although I never could, I can't disconnect the writing for me from the writing that I would be doing for the classroom too. They were all, it's just who you are as a reader writer. And I was never doing, it's fake writing or fake reading in the classroom. I was always doing the real reading and writing that mattered to me. So even some of those other images you just projected, that's my way. All right, every time I read a book, I'm going to have this notebook in front of me and I'm going to tab those passages that I go, wow, that would make a great mentor text.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd give a little context like that before we go back to that one on bewilderment. Do you do that for every book? Do you ask kids to do that for every book?
I used to ask, I mean, I would invite them to do that, but I didn't want to direct their thinking too much in the books that they were reading, but I definitely wanted to show them, I don't want to lose this gorgeous passage because I think this could take you to some really meaningful writing if you read this. But you and I have also talked about this. I think sometimes we have to do double, triple duty. If you're doing a book talk about bewilderment, you can also be collecting, you can do the book talk, but you can show passages from it for a quick write.
Yeah.
And also do some sketching or drawing because in essence, a lot of this book stands on that drawing. Because I was trying to think about what image kept popping into my head. And I kept thinking this young man, this little guy, Rob, we try so hard as parents to do the right thing, and it connected to those cairns in a way that until I started drawing this, I didn't make the connection. But when I started drawing it, I thought, we go out into the woods and rivers and mountains, and you see cairns everywhere without people thinking what ecosystem they're destroying every time they pick up one of those rocks. They think they're doing something beautiful, but they're destroying something in the meantime. So we think as parents, we're doing the best job we can do, but there are times when we have to admit it might not have been good enough. And we try our best, but it's not always perfect. So I'm just trying to make that notebook work for me as a reader writer and work for me as a teacher, reader writer of reading and writing.
I love how you said that that you're not, you have this kind of sneeze of ideas and things on a page, but you're not sure if that's going to lead you to prose or poetry, right?
For sure.
I think a lot of times kids write in their writer's notebook and they think that whatever that is going to be removed and become the essay. Like they don't see it as an exploration,
right,
or the planting of future seeds. They see it as more, okay, I'm going to respond to this poem, I'm going to respond to this photograph, and then eventually that becomes a thing.
Yeah. It makes me think, Kelly, that, I mean, just years ago, trying to show the kids, if you hear somebody say something that just, you go, oh my goodness, I don't want to forget that. And I say, write it in your notebook. And I still remember, because I wrote it in my notebook, that young woman who sat down at the table, looked at her 3 peers and said, my mother's having a baby. This is the one she wants. You know, and I thought,
Wow.
oh, wow. So those are the kinds of things, if you can let kids realize that they have a future, but they don't know where that future as a writer may go. It may not be as a professional writer, but it's, you have things to say and you have a voice, but you also heard somebody else say something that, all right, why did that impact me? Why did that make her 3 peers just go, what? And what was brought to mind for them from what she said? And do you remember it because you wrote it down? I mean, I even think too that there were kids I had 20 years ago who every now and then I'll get an email, and at the very bottom it will say stay gold. And I just love that.
Yes. Stay gold, pony boy.
That's right.
Exactly.
Oh.
So
wow.
Penny and I have both had the pleasure of reading the manuscript of a brand new Linda Reeve book that is coming out soon. Maybe Linda, you want to give us just a brief overview of what's coming?
I thank you for mentioning it. I don't know, Heinemann actually posted this morning that it's now ready. If teachers want to actually pre-order it, they can. Can I show the cover?
Please.
So what I love about this cover is the title came from one of my 8th graders, and it's got my kids on the back. And I loved that. I said, no bio. I don't want the bio on the back. I want the kids on the back. But thank you, Kelly, for even mentioning it. What I was trying to do in this book came from the fact that I grew up hating poetry. Because it was always poetry units. And every time I mentioned poetry in the classroom, even though this strikes me as so ironic. I mean, how long have I been doing quick writes with kids that the mentor texts are almost all poetry, and the kids never recognize it as poetry? If you don't tell them it's poetry, they're willing to read it. But they've had so many bad experiences with poetry units that you just kind of have to slide that poetic language into the pieces that you're reading to them. So I didn't like it growing up. And then I heard Ted Kuzer say at one of the NCTE sessions, you have to have read 200 poems before you can actually start to write them. And I thought, wow, I don't even know if we've read 10 or if kids have read poetry, because I put all the poetry in a place where they could access it really easily. And in a bench, this gorgeous inviting bench that was right on as they came in and out of the classroom, none of them picked it up. And so I thought, all right, I need something as a vehicle to drive them to poetry. And I don't want to mandate it, but I was looking at Georgia Hurd's heart maps one day, and I thought, we get a lot of wonderful writing out of this. Why couldn't we get some reading out of it too? And so I had the kids do what I called heart books. They drew their heart maps and then started looking at, all right, what's on my heart map that I care about? Where's a piece of poetry I could find that relates to what matters to me from that heart map? And that's how this book was born. And it's really about how do you give kids access to poetry in a way that they really find the poetry that is meaningful to them. And what I found is it's a lot of choices. It's like everything we do. It's the more choices they have, the more they're willing to try something. Because
I love the idea of here, find a poem that's meaningful to you and illustrate it. The student illustrations in your book are breathtaking. They're just incredible.
Thank you. And there's another irony, Kelly. I have taught very little art. I mean, these kids they're all artists, but we just don't give them the opportunities to show us what those visual images are in their heads. So I've given them a couple of art invitations along the way, but they've been as simple as they can be because I'm not an art teacher. But their illustrations, I think when you start looking at them for what do you see is what those kids had to think about that poem in order to craft that artwork. And
I love this. What I noticed in the book, two things. One, your goal was to get them to read more poetry in order to find that poem that was connected to their interest. And I had not expected that when I opened and started reading the whole of the book. But the other is that I watched over time as these heart books were developing in your thinking. And one of the big powers of them, I think, is that they were choosing perhaps to illustrate a page once a month. And you were tucking that work into those transitions we're all left with. I got 4 minutes till you go to pull out your heart book, so that a student didn't feel rushed to finish, to just sketch something and turn it in. It was something they were developing and would go back to, just like you would a beloved piece of writing. So that's part of, I think, where you got such exceptional work from these kids.
Well, I think because they suddenly realized, oh, I've got half an hour now. I can be working on the heart book. And it was set up in a way that I really didn't have to do anything to keep them working on it. They knew where the materials were. They knew where the books were. They knew what the goals were. It just put it all back on them. And I think that, I think you're right. I think because they had the time and they could be doing it on their own, and they knew it extended over the entire year, it changed how they worked on them.
I just imagine how many kids are picking up their phones during class because they've got lag time, and how much healthier it would be if they were looking at their notebook and imagining images and had colored pencils nearby and books of poetry. It's so much healthier.
Even as I finished this book, though, Penny, I kept thinking, teachers don't have to have a separate heart book to do this. I mean, the kids could be working in their notebooks, but the vehicle becomes, I would love it if you could find a poem a month and just do a double page spread and illustrate it, still with all the same possibilities on that double page spread. But if they're keeping notebooks, maybe they just continue with that in their notebooks. And you go, maybe after 4 or 5 months, you go, so look back at those 2 or 3 double page spreads you've done. And what have you noticed so far? So I'm not sure having the heart books as a vehicle was an absolute necessity, as long as there's something that the kids have consistently with them. The difference was I had them keep the heart books in the classroom. Because I think particularly teachers who teach middle school, kids go, oh, I left it home today. So notebooks sometimes were carried, they always were. They were carried home, brought back, carried home, brought back. So the heart books stayed in the classroom and they were always there. So there was no excuse for the kids to say, I don't have the materials with me. Everything is there. That might have been the slight difference, but I was looking at some of them this morning and I just thought, it is pretty amazing to me. Annika picked up on her own Archibald McLeish.
Hmm.
And she said one of her responses to his poem, she started out the response with, "After sleeping on my confusion." And I thought that in itself
Yeah.
is, I mean, that's the kind of thinking you would hope kids are doing in response to not just poetry, but any of their reading that they're doing. And I was looking at Thomas's, who read many of Charles Simich's poetry and was connecting it to Afghanistan and children working in bomb factories without ever the thought of where these bombs end up.
Wow.
I mean, that was some pretty deep thinking for him. And then comparing it to his adolescence and saying, I sometimes don't think about the consequences of my actions enough.
Wow.
Well, I was just struck by just how engaging, that poetry, there's a beauty in poetry, and the way you approach it is a way that kids can access that and turn that sort of anti-poetry bias around. And this was not planned, but as you said, Heinemann, is pre-orders start today. Is there a publication date?
They actually told me that I think it's June 21st. They did tell me they are having trouble getting paper.
I heard this yesterday as well. My husband is obviously a printer, so he's had endless trouble, but I didn't realize even a big publisher was. They are.
Yeah. They said they had to push things up several weeks, mainly because of the crunch with paper.
Yeah.
Well, once they get that paper and once they print that book, I look forward to that book going out into the world.
Thank you, Kelly.
And I love the fact, it kind of took Georgia Hurd's, idea of heart maps and it kind of expanded it. And for those of you listening right now, Georgia is going to join us in a week or two. So
that's great.
That'll be a great conversation. So I want to say thank you again, Linda, for hanging out with us today. It's always fun to see you. I haven't seen you in person in a long time, and
I know
that changes soon.
Hoping I can get out to Anaheim. That would be really
for sure. Well, thanks to everybody who's joining us today. I think you're such a light for National Poetry Month, as well as just the teaching profession. So thanks again, Linda. Always a delight to see what you're doing in your notebook.
It's great to see the two of you and to talk to you always. Thank you.
We'll see y'all tomorrow.
All righty. Bye.